what starts off as something inherently illegible, inherently challenging, as Black aesthetics demands, we started to try to put a vocabulary that didn't confine it and make it like smaller, but actually expand what kinds of context that work belongs in and what kind of scholarly context that work belongs in.
The archive is embodied. So it's what you not only share within your family, but it's that similarity that travels beyond the individual. And it records a history by virtue of the fact that it's shared.
Demanding that artists, as they were generating theory through their practice, be considered with the same rigor as more traditional scholarship, so that we were thinking that artists produce theory and we can start to put language and contextualize that within our own framework.
How do we allow the archive to almost constantly be creating, as opposed to situating it at a certain time in a certain space?
I think collaboration is central to the work of Local Blackness. It offers a way of building a discourse and a trajectory that is not set by any means. It has the ability to move in different directions, but what it allows is for a kind of continuity of thought.
Welcome, everybody. Is this sound okay? Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you so much to Anna Winter, Josh Cleveland, and Cedric Simmons for putting together such a piece that introduced us so well. But today we're here for Charts to Follow, Keeping Time's Intergenerational Transmissions. We want to thank the Department of Film and Media Studies at Emory University for always contributing to our events. This is a long tradition now. It's 12 years old, and so we're very indebted to them. Hosting a screening and conversation about Keeping Time feels to us like a homecoming. And not simply in the Beyoncé way, but in the Michelle Prediman way. That's how she described the 10-year anniversary of Liquid Blackness, and I quote, "Homecomings and reunions are both long-standing traditions that commemorate the power of the return. As we come home, reunite and return, we revisit those significant spaces, memories, and people in our lives. We're reminded of our journeys and of the formative, sometimes painful challenges and turning points that made us, nurtured us, and stretched us," unquote. With Keeping Time, we return to Black music in cinema as a model for our scholarly and pedagogical practice, which began with Larry Clark's Passing Through. The first, I forgot those two, yeah. The first in a lineage of films inspired by Tapscott and the Ark, followed by Barbara Culler's Horace Tapscott musical Creole. We feel affirmed by a recent presentation by the Mellon Foundation about the role of jazz in American culture, which championed the expansiveness of the art form and offering a collective mission that eschews personal ownership and hinges on a practice of reciprocity. As Mellon President Elizabeth Alexander put it, jazz is also profoundly imbricated with the other arts, a liquid relationship, as we call it, following Toni Morrison's insights about Romare Bearden's collages. The artist described, as Elizabeth Alexander reminded us, the artist described it as, "I can't do it unless I get with the music." We're not musicians, but we have been posing a similar question through the Black visual arts. How do they get with the music? Passing Through was the first to tussle with the challenge of maintaining a legacy without or in rejection of the terms within which a proper archive might be established, or the very terms of securing it, by mirroring Tapscott's refusal to record for an extractive music industry, and becoming instead the music's maroon archive, a musical record in film form. In Keeping Time, another liquid record, if you will, of the same extended ensemble, although several decades later, a challenge to the possibility of maintaining archives of radical praxis pivots around missing charts. The score, the sheet music. The musicians agree that charts are vital to the archive insofar as their means to spread the music and allow new people to join. Yet they also know that they were occasionally withheld by Tapscott himself so that band members would feel their way through the music. Of course, on the one hand, the charts are the other side of the record, not as scores, but as maps to follow, secret histories, as Chip Linscott has shown us, for an earlier covenant. And Passing Through teaches us that cinema can function as one of these maps. And we have been, as a group, tracking many other maps through our research on music videos Black art. Indeed, Tapscott showed Passing Through to his band members all the way to his death. At the same time, as Fumio Kiji points out, the record is an archive for pedagogy, thus also a mode of initiation, as Michael Session explains in the film when he says that when he heard Coltrane on a record, it was as if he had said, "Michael, get a horn." That is, the record is an archive of and for the practice, but also a future archive of Black intentionality. On the other hand, Keeping Time knows that as institutional archive, the record simultaneously reproduces the disappearance of the ensemble as such, of its praxis, of the means of staying together. So then we ask, what secures its futurity? Passing Through taught us that if we approach Black art through study, we'll see the way it images lineages to come, the musicians of the future not yet born, who will continue the same visionary project. This is what the ARC's musician describes as the call. All right, yeah. One may be beckoned by the music, hearing Coltrane on a record, or interpolated by a band member hey, you with the horn case, which is something that Tapscott would do. Yet here, the Althusserian script is put to a different service to summon a collectivity, a study group, a future self, not the police. The intergenerational ties that bring the musicians together are not institutional, and yet that does not make them less effective. And this has been our gamble too. The institution can be a home, but it cannot dictate how we practice resilience and togetherness. Ultimately, in keeping time, the charts remain maroon because they chart a knowledge of freedom as an invitation into an intergenerational family to come, kinships from, of the future one is called into. The challenge, keeping time reminds us, so-called scholars, is how to practice collaboratively. That is how to study, whereby, as Stefano Harney, Valentina Desideri put it, quote, knowledge is not just social, but a way to make the social. Not just collective, but a way to experiment with collectivity itself. Not just a debt to the past, but an activation of debt as a way to enter the future together, unquote. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to do some quick intros for our amazing guests that we'll be speaking to after the screening. So first, we have the filmmaker of Keeping Time, Darol Olu Kae. He's a filmmaker from and based in Los Angeles. Kae's artistic practice disrupts conventional narrative structures of storytelling through its dynamic treatment of sound and image. His highly collaborative, research-based approach to filmmaking grounds itself in the nuance of Black expressive modalities in America and challenges the medium to render the full complexity of Black being visible in cinematic terms. He was awarded the Pardino d'Oro for Best International Short Film in 2020 at the Locarno Film Festival, and the Special Jury Recognition for Poetry at the 2021 South by Southwest Film Festival, both for his film I Ran From It and Was Still In It. He is currently writing his feature film debut, Without a Song, for which he received a Creative Capital Award. We'll also be joined by Josslyn Luckett, an assistant professor in the Department of Cinema Studies. Her research interests include and combine media studies, jazz and improvisation studies, and comparative and relational ethnic studies, with special attention to the intersection of race, media, and social justice, to representations of the Afro-diasporic spiritual practices in film and television. Her book, Toward a More Perfect Rebellion, Multiracial Media Activism Made in LA, is forthcoming from the University of California Press. She is also a screenwriter and playwright. She wrote the teleplay for MTV original movie Love Song, directed by Julie Dash. And in 2021, she joined the writing staff of Ava DuVernay's Queen Sugar for its 7th and final season. And so for those that, we also have a live stream going. And for those on the live stream, we're gonna pause the live stream while we screen the film for the next like 30 minutes. So come back then. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming this evening, and enjoy the film. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Grab a seat. Oh, yeah.
How's everyone doing?
Thank you. First off, what an amazing film. Just so good. It was so exciting just to be able to see it again. So to kind of start off, we wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of production and making process of this, because it's really interesting of like, the film gives a sense, like, it feels like it might be a documentary. It's scripted, right? That there's like, the people in film are playing themselves, they're in this real thing, they're real places where they do these things, but there's also a script behind it. And so I wonder if you could like speak a little bit to that kind of like decision to create this film that kind of is situated between documentary and fiction, this kind of fabulation that you're kind of doing, and like what the like impulse behind that choice was.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's just being conscious of like kind of film history, right? A lot of most representations of jazz in film are often situated in documentary form, and especially in relationship to, I'm thinking of like the Ark too. There's a ton of documentaries that exist of them, and before I wanted to approach the band with the idea, it was like, what is my intervention? Like, what's my contribution? You know, and so it's just kind of coming from that space of how could I help like elevate the story and tell this story, which seems like a mundane, and I kind of gleaned that story from having seen a lot of the documentaries on them or talked to them, and it felt like blurring that line was a critical intervention that could help maybe elevate maybe the story's appeal, right? Because I think oftentimes when it's framed in documentary terms, we kind of think of it as like kind of, even the form is like considered by a lot of folks like less rigorous than like, you know, so for me I wanted to kind of take their lives out of the documentary context, the realist context, and open it up a bit and play. And that's kind of what this was, and it came from, you know, me writing a script and then collaboratively working with them to kind of reshape it and break it open, and then showing up on the days when we were filming and not ever looking at the script, you know, and following those emotional beats.
Maybe you can put a little bit of context also of these other documentaries if you want to jump in about that.
Okay, sure. Again, thank you so much for having us and for this wonderful event, and I'm so thrilled to meet you for the first time. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you all joined us. Yeah, so we have this history of these amazing filmmakers coming out of UCLA Film School in the late 60s, early 70s, including Barbara McCullough, Larry Clark. And these were filmmakers who said, we want to actually capture our Los Angeles, which means our artists, visual artists, our musicians, our activists, our meaning makers, right? Really for the first time. And so both Barbara and Larry Clark, they decided they loved Horace Tapscott's band. They knew that what an important culture worker he was from the mid-60s onward. He had come up at Jefferson High School under the tutelage of Samuel Brown, who was an amazing conductor, arranger, composer. So high school music programs in Los Angeles, first of all, were incredible in the 30s and 40s, and Horace is in that lineage. So he goes on to continue that legacy. He talks in the film about his great teachers, and he brings that forward in his band leading and arranging. So it's just thrilling that these filmmakers who are coming out of UCLA, kind of like they recognize that they are beginning a tradition where they don't necessarily have the same kind of elders and teachers that someone like Horace comes from. And I always thought it was interesting about the LA Rebellion folks that they turn toward the other arts to see these lineages of transmission, knowledge transmission, because it's almost like there was a gap in the filmmaking, I think. So anyway, these films, they collaborate with Horace Tapscott, both of these filmmakers. And Larry Clark makes a short film that Tapscott does the composing for, As Above, So Below. That's the first one. And then his feature film, Passing Through, features Horace Tapscott and is very much inspired by Horace Tapscott's life and career and band and struggles with the music industry. And all along this whole time in the 70s, Barbara is pointing her camera to Horace Tapscott and collecting footage that she'll collect for decades, actually, and finally make her feature film documentary called Musical Griot, Horace Tapscott. So all of these films are happening already, and then the younger generation comes along, and also it's kind of like remixing that and listening to the stories, because there's such valuable history lessons in both of those films. So,
If I may, just add, part of it is like the image of jazz, right? The image of jazz in photographic tech, like history, is, you know, the dominant history is like jazz club, smoky jazz club, black and white, or recording sessions. You see musicians and during the process of recording, and it's all about this musical event. And so for me, as studying this larger history, but also with the band, it's like, oh, it's not about the musical event. It's about the thing that prepares you for the musical event. So part of the film was wanting to make that image in cinematic terms, right? So the gathering, right? Their homes, and most importantly, the relationships that make the music possible, right? So that for me was, it's not about them getting on stage. Like the stage is like an extra thing. And so I was like, and that's in their history. It's not me saying anything profound. It's me listening to their histories and what they've lived. And I think for the film, it's just highlighting the relationship that what happens when they come together, and the challenges and the obstacles and how difficult that typically is, in that intergenerational tension. But then also just in LA, that's not the night scene, like that's not it. The image of jazz in LA for me is just some more like subterranean, you know, history where they're not getting paid, they're struggling to get bread, they're trying to make it work. You're dealing with like, man, you're way older than me now, I'm financially responsible to get you some money. Like, I'm 25, I just want to play music.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that resonated with us the most, right? You know, that's what we call the study, and it's so interesting that you also approach the filmmaking as this part of the study, right? That it is the network, it is the praxis. How are the musicians getting there? You know, who needs a ride? You know, yeah.
Yeah, because like so much of the films like takes place in like, it's in the car, it's on the front porch, it's in the like boxes of charts, it's all these other places about like that the jazz ensemble is not just on the stage. It is like, it's the way people like connect.
Yeah, but we don't look there, right? We look at the stage, and so it's like we got to shift and subvert that. And it came from like maybe even turning in like liner notes, right? And reading and being like, oh, damn, why are all these songs named after people? Why are they all named after places? So the music they're playing about, they're telling us where to look. Like they're just saying, look at this person, look at this community, look at this neighborhood. Even with the arc, like so many of their songs are named after folks who maybe met tragic ends, who they no longer see, or it's just like an interesting thing. So it's like, okay, let's hone in on relationships and see what happens.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also like, so much of the film is this kind of like, it's about it's about these archives, about these pasts, but like, how do we like remember things, right? Because I think one of the things that like pops out is like the idea of like who like sat in a stool, right? And like that matters just as much as anything else, right? And kind of like with that, I wonder if you could speak a bit to like your process is so collaborative. And we had Kaya Lu here for the 10th anniversary for Liquid Blackness 2 years ago, the colorist for the film. And she talked about like, I mean, coloring is usually done like post-production. And she talked about like that she had a very unique experience with this film of like, you bringing her in so much earlier to have like collaborate on the process, right? As opposed to like getting a film at the end and be like, okay, like I'm trying to figure out what to do once the footage is done, right? And so instead here it's like, well, like thinking about like what is your process of like your collaborative process, and the same with these like artists in this band are like collaborating. How do you think about your relationship with the other people that you're working with to make something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot from the music. I will say at the outset, it's just to trouble these notions at the beginning. Like, why does the colorist come on at the very end? There's nothing. I could easily get on a phone call with them. We could be talking about it, you know, but it's so regimented, and so being that we had a pre-existing relationship, I was like, dude, you need to come to set. Like, she hadn't been on set before, you know what I mean? And it's like that for a lot of people, like my editor. Prior to the last film I made, that's premiering next month, like he hadn't been on set. It's like, come to set. Like we need to like, these are like these boundaries don't exist, right? Like where you're just in the room, there should be some type of, even just a presence. I think I get a lot from the presence where they are seeing and witnessing the process, and I'm a big oversharer in the radical art of sharing, and so I'm like sending them different iterations of my mini uh, research decks that I have for the film, or different iterations of source material, you know. And then it's just I like to create an ongoing conversation, or try to create an ongoing conversation with everyone, where what I found that works best for like the finished film itself, or the finished object, is like everyone has to feel like their fingerprint is in it when they see it, or on it when they see it. And it needs to, and it happens at every stage. And for me, it's about the communication, you know. And there's no way we could make a film about the Pan African People's Orchestra that did not kind of honor them, not just in the film itself, but how we make the film. So it was no choice that it had to be as complicated and like multi-directional and collaborative as the band is itself, you know, because I have to answer to them. You know, we have to stand before them and, you know, take account of, you know, like the first screening was with them, and it's like, okay, like, you know, if they had cut it, like nixed it, it would have been, you know, another story. But I think it goes on to like the practice of it, you know.
So Josslyn, I don't know if you would agree, but to me, this is what I hear you as part of this generation, right? Now the contemporary generation of filmmakers, they're not taking prisoners. Like they're real about, you have such clarity about what it is that moves the music or the film, the art form forward. And to me, this is the most exciting thing, right? So that those insights that have been practiced, right, in the music, now they're fully transferred to the filmmaking process. And it's an entire community of your generation. You're working with people from previous generations. Yeah, please.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, is that, and I wanted you to speak a little bit more about what it meant for you to be the younger person speaking, you know, working with the elders, because this is moving forward, and that can be unsettling, threatening for the elders at times. You hear just a little bit of that in there, because they are so invested in making sure they understand the history of the younger generation. So how did you straddle that?
Yeah, I mean, well, I sat back and listened for like a year and didn't say nothing. You know, but I also came to the band with ideas. Like, we're in the process, we just signed a book contract where we're presenting the 60-plus year history of the band through visual ephemera. Yeah, and so I mean, that's, for me, it was like, well, you have to come with some stuff. And that's one of many things we hope to contribute. I didn't want to be super just extractive and come to the band like, oh, you guys are super interesting and impressive, give, right? I think that's the history of the relationship between filmmaker and, the musicians more often than not, right? And so it was my job not to fall prey, to that trap. And so what I did was initially I just introduced, I have mutuals with Michaela, and I just hung around, and then I got invited to rehearsal, which is in the neighborhood. And I'm from the neighborhood too, but that's also like not enough either. You know what I mean? And so I went to the same high school as Horace Tapscott, and where Samuel Brown taught, where I was never introduced to them. So that's part of like my thing, is like I have that on my back. Like, that's what I'm carrying. You know what I mean? And the arc is very, they take no prisoners in terms of like, the preservation of the music, of black music, right? And so making a film about them, like, that's something that that's a parallel kind of source of, like parallel aim. But basically I would show up for rehearsals for a year and just listen and watch and, casually interact with folks. And then after a year I was called up and I had to present the idea of a film that's based on documentaries, based on all the books that have been written on the band, and just oral histories, and presenting that in like a, hybrid form. And I got called in front of the garage and I had to present my case. A lot of the brothers there was kind of like stone-faced and like, very in the best way possible, because they should be protective. This is our music in the sense that this is our art form as well. And it's like, who are you to come in here? And those questions are valid. Even though I'm from South Central, I'm from Watts, still it's like, what's your orientation to all this? And so I just listened, and presented, and then they were down. And it's also, once you get that nod, that's a different type of call, you know what I mean, from them. But with that call comes a responsibility, you know what I mean? And so I couldn't, they were watching, like, how are we moving, you know, what we're doing. And so that's kind of been like the impetus. That was the impetus for kind of the work, and just a lot of listening and coming before the collective and just being honest and authentic and being transparent with my aim, which is to add a page to the history. This is just one small, there's been so many great things that are being done in and around the history of the band, and hopefully this is one contribution. And this is, but it's also, this orientation is because I come from, you know, the tradition that I claim as well. You know, Barbara McCullough, AJ, you know, Khalil, Brad. There's folks who've been thinking about, you know, black art in relationship to jazz for a while. And so a lot of these ideas are the accumulation of intense kind of thinking with, you know, the Fred Moultons and Ferry Griffin, and just so many other folks to name, and musicians as well.
The charts, the chatter. Yeah. So this is a great point to ask about something. So passing through, some of you know it, have seen it with us. Begins with the chatter of the musicians. So the first image is that basically the list of musicians known and unknown to which the film is dedicated, right? But we hear the musicians kind of tuning the instruments, getting ready to play. And I always think about that in relation to what Fred Moulton has said about the beginning of Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. That also, even though it's recorded in a studio, like you hear the beginning. And that the real, you just said it, like this kind of, you know, sitting and listening, all of whatever sustains the relationship, that's the chatter. And so the music has already started, right? And what I like about Keeping Time, and I wonder if you have thoughts, either, you know, both of you, is that we hear the chatter, but then something goes south immediately. So we hear Maya's voice saying, oh, you went somewhere else, right? So rather than the music picking up, and I find it so touching because it is really emphasizing the difficulty of this work, right? It doesn't just happen from nowhere. I mean, Larry did it the way he did it, which was phenomenal. Kind of, he set up the opportunity to complicate that decades later. So yeah, I just wonder.
Oh yeah, you're right. It's this idea and focus on the pre-event, right? Where that's where all the energetically, that's where everything is happening. You know, this, and we approached it with sonically, even with our score with James. What we would do in the recording session, the music that the score is a product of or is based on, are all. It isn't them rehearsing or playing music. It's actually them tuning and warming up. And so we gathered everyone's warm-up routines, and the score is actually based on their warm-up routines. And that's just we're trying to add echoes and layers, right? It's just about the accumulation of these layers and echoes that are in unison with what I feel are like one of the main themes of the film is kind of this honing in on the pre-event and honing in on the garage as this fugitive gathering space. You know, that's like this pre-punk. Before it was a site for punk shit, it was a site for black avant-garde art. Like, this was happening in the 60s. So this isn't new. This is just a last iteration of them activating the garage in this way. But it's also turning towards the moving away from kind of the jazz image and the idea of a singular musical genius, and thinking about collective coexistence. And what does that sound like? It sounds like, you know, talking shit. You know, it sounds like encouragement. It sounds like laughter. It sounds like all these things all mixed together. And so we needed to present sonically, you know, a sophisticated articulation of that space and those reverberations.
Yeah, let me ask you, because I've been thinking about this too in terms of, I'm actually for the first time teaching a class on the biopic. And, you know, we're always wrestling with fiction, biography, and history. And what, you know, like even in books, where those would exist at the store and what shelf. But one of the questions we talk about a lot is you know, like worthiness or greatness of the figure, and how that's really false. I mean, or it leads us in these ways that kind of aren't sustainable for many of our communities, you know, in sort of linear great white man sort of ways. And so you've done something really different, and so I want to connect that thought to, again, the earlier question about scripted versus improv, all of that. I mean, when we think about music or dance, when we have sort of structured improvisation, in my mind, I would think, well, filmmaking's too expensive. You can't just play, you know, like that. And you are really, you know, making us understand that you actually can play in this medium. And I just want you to share a little bit about that, because that's very freeing to me.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know we could do it until it was done. You know what I mean? Like we were committed to trying it, because we have to be, because our form was dictated by the band and the people who are in the band, and they're multi-directional, and it's like we need to be multi-directional, and the story was around Michaela, but not Michaela. It's about, you know, very early on, it was like us asking folks. I remember asking like a saxophonist saxophonist who's in the band, like, yo, is keeping time, like, what is keeping time? Is that just relegated, you know, to the drummer? And I remember them being like, I mean, yeah, like, you know, like, cause I'm not a musician, so they're like, yeah, in basic terms, but in the arc, we all keep the time. And so for me, it was like, oh, okay, we're talking about continuity. Like, we're talking about, like, you know, past, present, but also just like, there's none of that stuff is separated too, you know, and it's like, visually and sonically, it's like, oh, this is exciting, because we could do something, we could play, we could actually stretch and try something, and I think we were all committed, and thankfully the people I was working with, it wasn't no mandate to, it has to be like this, otherwise we wouldn't have made it in terms of it has to be like a linear narrative or it has to follow. No, it was open, you know, and so I think that was something that, you know, we benefited from, was the openness of it, and the musicians were already down too, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and so just to follow the figure of Horace Tapscott, a different understanding of his greatness comes through here, right? Because he is the whispered inspiration for so many of these people, and again, the multi-generational piece, the transmission, but more than anything, the love. I mean, I just feel like that everyone is showing up because of that love, and that was the love that Horace gave to those musicians too.
Yeah, I feel like we wanted to, like, show the presentness of the past too. Like, yeah, people know of Horace, and his name is getting spoken of more and more, but it was like, what does his voice sound like? You know, and there's not a lot of material out there, and so I was fortunate to, you know, be in community with some of the older musicians, and they gave some archival interview, like audio, and so that the film is an archival piece where him and Roberto Miranda were just having a conversation. So I feel like that's the heart. You get the warmth because we hear his voice. There's something about sound and the unconscious, right? And then we used that audio and we did our thing to it with James and the score. But also then we got access, we're fortunate to get the permission of the family to use, we actually can see Horace like living and moving and laughing and dancing, and that's like a personal home movie from his collection. And so that's kind of what we tried to do, was like, history isn't this static thing that's just isolated and relegated here. Like, as we're sitting and drinking coffee, like, history's with us, right? And so that's kind of the overarching thing, was like, how could we show that dual narrative happening? Because it happens as we move through the world. Like, the past is, you know, I'm thinking I'm never not reading Dion Brand, you know, so that's a thing too. Like, history's always with us, you know, and wanting to kind of articulate what that might look like visually and like sonically with this piece in relationship to Horace, but then also just Black LA as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and so before we move to the audience Q&A, we want to, a few of our Liquid Blackness members also have some questions that kind of propel this, so I want to pass it over to D. Jones.
Hello. So I'm directing this question to Josslyn. So I was moved reading your writing Rebellion Musics and that fight against erasure that you allude to within it. So it's not only because of you're touching on the multiracial reality, or what you call the cross-racial collaborations and the social justice commitments of Black, Latin, and Asian musicians, but more profoundly, I'm thinking about your inclusion of your father, Pops, right? And, you talk about how his mainstream sensibilities kind of lead to some of the practices that cause that kind of erasure. But then you come around and talk about how you ultimately see him as leading you to that Watch Jazz Festival where you missed that opportunity to see Horace Tapscott and the orchestra play, right? He led you back there, right? Ultimately, back in '78. And I was fascinated about this because I include my late father's love of music in my own work, which shapes the way that I see and I seek and I look at things. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to what was instilled by your pops or even other members of your orchestra that influence your work.
Look at you trying to bring the floodgates. Wow, D. Jones. I'm just meeting D. Jones, and now Yeah. All right. Wow, unexpected question. I love it though, especially my mom's here. Her best friend who knows my dad is here, so this is gonna be interesting. And I also, want to be mindful to connect it to what we're listening, what we just watched and listened to. My brother, who's older, is a musician, and so whenever he's asked about my dad, my dad always said, I played the turntable, that was his instrument. And it's true. I mean, we just had the best music in the house all the time. And he made sure to have us see live music, too. I was just telling someone the other day about getting to see Nina Simone on a school night. We actually, we were living in Orange County, like the story says, and he drove us up to I think it was the Wilshire Theater to see Nina. And he made sure that I listened to those Nina lyrics, too, as a biracial woman, to listen to Sophronia and all the four women and all of that. So there was so much storytelling in the music, I think, that he always wanted me to know, and really pay attention to. So it's touching to me that you would ask about that, because certainly just his joy, and my dad is someone who didn't always have a lot of joy. He had a lot of joy, he had a lot of other things. But the joy piece was so much connected to culture and our culture and all this great music. And he did love the mainstream stuff, Nancy Wilson, okay? But it's nice to think that all of these people actually are connected to one another. I think that's actually something that Danny Widener talks a lot about in his writing about the Black art scene in Los Angeles, that someone like Horace Tapscott, who we consider free or avant-garde, is so rooted in big band, Buddy Collette, all of, Samuel Brown, all of these musicians, Gerald Wilson, who are, it's doesn't become a linear version of the music. It's cyclical, and these musicians love and respect each other. So I know I'm going in a whole lot of different directions, but I appreciate the question because I feel like there's a connection to the kind of work and lineage and the fathers also here. I think going to all these shows with my dad, I also recognized that it was a space, especially in jazz. Now, I wish I had grown up singing many more women musicians, but I saw a lot of the men. I saw a lot of the Black men. And I got to see them the way that culture was not always letting me see them. I got to see them love each other and appreciate and share and be vulnerable with each other and listen to each other. So that for me was always such a healing experience of Black masculinity, all of those things. So it's just interesting that, yes, I think, you know, my pop's guide was to that. I'm tripped out that you keyed in on that in the writing, but I appreciate that. That's really beautiful.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I when I walked up here, actually, when we were coming from the coffee, I just started hearing Parliament Funkadelic, and a guy was walking behind me with it blasting from the speaker, and I knew at that moment that my father was there, right? And so that's how it kind of, and when I heard that saw that from your piece, and then connecting it with the kind of father-son relationship that's depicted in the film, it just made it a curious thing for me. So thank you.
Anna?
Hi. Thanks to both of y'all. Love the film. One or a couple of the moments that struck out to me are like the moments with the mom, like the swing, and then she's also playing by herself. And you kind of talked about a little bit how we see jazz a lot, or jazz films, and it can be like dude heavy, you know? So I'm just thinking like how you think about, for both of you, like the maternal or women in jazz, in whatever kind of roles in jazz. So that's my question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your question, too. No, that's why it had to be in here, right? Because that's not, you know, and this maybe opens up something I haven't talked about publicly. So yeah, that came from kind of mining, you know, Steve Azardi's work. He would talk about kind of Horace's, and it's open, but for me, that's Horace and his mother. Because Horace learned how to play with his mother. There's stories of his mother calling him up to the piano table and having him play, him and his sister play these things, right? And so also that's key to LA's history. Like there was Samuel Browns in the high schools, but there's a tradition of Anna Hightower, I believe. There's a tradition of Black women teaching jazz in the home, you know, and I think those folks, and it's that we don't have an image of that, you know. And part of what I wanted to do, and formally why it looks how it looks with her and him and her moments, were because in my mind I wanted to explore the idea of like discovering that archive. That's why we shot it in 35. So everything present day with Michaela is 16. All the vignettes are 35. And so I wanted to approach this as creating the archive that we then discovered and used and accessed as found footage. So, and the story of like her playing at night is she could not have a moment. She needed, after her job or teaching and training, that's the historical part. But for me, what is my contribution to that? We have to touch history. So for me, it's like, and there's a larger scene of like her getting ready and this other that didn't make it into the final film, but it's like, what does it look like? I know this thing happened because Horace talks about it, where he talks about his mother teaching them how to play. And like if we listen to the musicians, they tell us, like a jazz image says one thing, but if we listen to the musicians, they'll say, my mother's my teacher. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But that's not the image. Right. But what's my intervention? And so I was like, well, what does it look like? Like, I'm sure, because Horace's mother was a musician from Houston. Right. He had a band. You know what I mean? And so she comes to LA, she still want to play. I'm sure those desires are still there. So for me, it was, she's a mother here. There's a whole life here. But when everyone's off to bed and the lights are low, I'm sure she plays a solo. Like, I'm sure Horace heard her playing the piano, or, you know what I mean? And, you know, I can't not, that's Nia Long, no, that's not Nia Long, that's Nia Andrews, which is LA royalty. Nia Andrews, her father, Reggie Andrews, the teacher at Locke High School, who continued the Samuel Brown tradition. You know, Reggie Andrews, you know, we have today in LA a lot of Terrace Martin, you know, everything that's attached to Terrace Martin and Kamasi White, like all these cats, even the larger contemporary jazz community came from Horace or Reggie Andrews. Most of the time, Reggie Andrews, Patrice Rushen, you know what I mean? And so Exactly, Billy Higgins, exactly, right? And so for me, that's what that's about too. You know, it's like nodding at these folks who are central to this, because this is LA's, this is some, you listen to Brother JJ, this is black LA music, you know what I mean? And it's okay to claim that and say it, right? And so I wanted to show that in the film. We do that by Nia Andrews and all these folks we bring together, but the maternal is central. It's always been central. It's always been central to the music, you know? And so it's just, for me, this was an opening, and hopefully I'll be able to explore some other ideas. I have some other around the maternal, but thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to, can I say a little something
Yeah,
about this?
please,
Yeah,
please.
because I love that. I love those sequences with the mother so much for a couple reasons. One is, please, can we just show that scene in every jazz history film? How to explain swing. There ain't no words for it. You have to feel it and listen and play it. You know, I mean, that was perfect. That was so, so good. The other thing I was thinking about when I watched that scene, and I think a lot about this radio interview, I think it was that Haile Grima gave when he was saying something about, we're always shown as orphans, like we don't come from nowhere, you know? And we are not orphan people. Like, we come from a tradition. We have grandmothers and great-grandfathers. And so this was that scene for me, too. It was like, you have to just slow it down and hear and see that lineage, to see that mother. But I love the quiet of that solo performance. Is so touching. I love that. But because, yeah, and we know from Barbara McCullough's film, we know from reading the books on Horace that, I mean, she was everything. The great story is that they came from Houston, and the day that they came literally into the city of Los Angeles, she drove him to his music teacher's house before she drove them to their new home. Like that was the more important first stop. And that was moms who did that.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think one of the ways, you know, we try to trouble history too in the present is with Nia, one of the things I asked was like what we're gonna play. And so what she's actually playing, her version is she's playing Tapscottian Waltz, the song. And so but she improvised on, we sent the original, and I think Jamel Dean's Tapscottian Waltz, and then she's kind of, what that solo is her, you know, exploring her relationship as the mother in relation to, you know, this object, this piano. That's why the first note is kind of just like, it's a abrupt and hard one. Maybe like, what is her relationship now that there's some distance between them? You know, it's not easy, but then I also like the idea of her playing a version of what could be seen as like Tapscottian Waltz. Like, maybe that's, and it's a Horace composition, the song, I believe. And really just the idea there is, you know, thinking of maybe he's in bed somewhere and he heard her playing something. So the thing that he would eventually write 30, 40 years later it's this idea of ownership or authorship. Like, yeah, it's the Tapscott composition. No, he heard his mother play that song, or he heard his mother play a version of that song, or, you know, so I wanted to just open up, you know, this is me and my feelings is just, you know, the idea of like, opening up the past and the future and the present, and just kind of like commingling it and creating some type of, you know, interplay, you know, visually and sonically.
Thank you. And then, well, I'll ask later. I'll open it up. Okay.
What strikes me is also that, I mean, you said it with the swing, right? That sound carries these lines of flight, and they're passed on, right? That's what you described again, like improvise or interpreting and improvising on something, and the film has this constant lines of flight, whether they're happening through editing or sometimes the color correction, right? Certainly the sound design. I just want to mention we've been trying to get James William Blades to come here many times. He's having a baby this weekend. That's the reason he's not. Like, he will be coming in the future. Like, yeah. Because, yeah, we wanted to get that part as well.
Yeah, no, it is. I think at every level we wanted to, a lot of it is creating an impasse of wanting to, we have a desire. I want to hear them play too. You know, I want to see them play, right? And so it was wanting to create a moment or moments where we deny that desire throughout the film, and maybe at the end now we could actually be ready to watch them play and listen to them now, you know. But we've hopefully created a desire, you know, by continually hinting at it, stopping it, hinting at it, stopping it. You know, but that's also maybe how they, I don't want to speak for them, but like the music, right? It's so much kind of back and forth, right? So.
Yeah, and so I guess we can move to audience questions. So if anyone has any questions, we have 2 microphones up here. If you just want to head down and you can ask any questions you might have.
Hello, my name is Josh. I'm also kind of part of Liquid Blackness. I am a part of Liquid Blackness. I was really interested in this concept of collaboration, right? In this ensemblic practice within film as well, right? And I was curious about just the material process of making a film and how those, like, the different moments where you get hang-ups in your material, or if someone, like you talked about, like getting a ride to the rehearsal, a ride to set, right? How the industry kind of makes that process difficult to have that kind of wiggle room if you're coming from like a commercial space. But if you're in an experimental space, I'm curious of how you talked about it, about borrowing from other arts. And I guess on this film, in like some of the details, were there ever hang-ups that adjusted the formality of the work as well, that changed the voice, where you had to kind of get out of the way logistic-wise, and where the materials kind of changed the vision of the narrative as well?
Yeah, no, thank you. Haile Garima came up earlier, and I always have Haile in my head when he says, you know, you write a film, or you write, like I think it's like the 3-film equation, where you write one film, you shoot one film, and you edit another, right? So I try to like not be beholden to the script as well. And when we edit, this is going to be something completely different. But yeah, there's always like challenges, and you know, you try to practice like strategies, and you know, you have protocols for when things go awry, because they will. You know what I mean? And so I think in the edit, that's where the film is made too. But there's challenges. We only had 3 days of filming. We wanted, I'll speak of one scene in particular, and it really made the film too. And we didn't have this until the day of. It's the brother Fundi's driving to Lemert Park, and he has the conversation with brother JJ, who's like the other elder, and they're outside the vehicle talking. We showed up to film that. That was maybe the second scene of that day, and we didn't know who Fundi was going to be talking to. We were trying to get another local community member in Lemert Park, which is like this, you know, the heartbeat of South Central in terms of art. But we couldn't, you know, he was a barber, a local barber, business owner, and he wasn't here, he wasn't coming. And I thankfully had a relationship with brother JJ, who's also like a huge person in the area. And he was always like, if you ever need anything, just call me. I had done some interviews with him, and some of the audio was like based on him taking me around the neighborhood, meeting OGs like Ross Poet Ojinki, and just listening and capturing those vocals. And so I called him, and he was like, I'm right around the corner. And he just met us there, and they know each other because he's kind of affiliate of the band. So that conversation they're happening is a real conversation, not based on the script. It's just him getting there 2 minutes before we're shooting and being like, yo, y'all are talking about X, Y, Z. This is kind of what it's about. And then we did 2 takes, and that was it, you know. And so that's kind of you need to be. I always think of Lucretia Martel, and she has this wonderful quote that informs a lot of how I try to make films, where she says, we do all this preparation and planning so that the unplanned thing can happen. And so that's kind of what, you know, we're rigorous in our strategy and our protocols, and knowing, okay, we're going to get there, we're shooting this, and then we get to have the confidence to let all that shit go, to let it just, okay, we have to be fluid. We have to be fluid the day of. And then when the edit happens, you know, we didn't have a ton of money, you know what I mean? So I think I've been fortunate because I've been able to work with people who I've had long-standing relationships with, and I had time to where it's like, if they are making a commercial, then we could put our film to the side and keep making this. You make this, then come back to it. And there's something about that return that happens in the edit too, because none of my films have been like, edit in 3 days and we're done. Nah, it's been like, the most recent one, Blur, was like 9 months off and on, or like a year off and on, you know, and there's something that accompanies that process. For me, it's this accumulation of ideas, and sometimes that phone edit, the phone conversation, that didn't come until late in the edit, where we're like, oh, actually, I think our editor, Grayson, had that idea, right? And, you know, the shape doesn't appear. We could force it if we're, you know, under like capitalist pressure, and you're gonna get a finished product. I've had to do that for other films and art pieces, but with these pieces, I've been fortunate to not kind of, you know, be driven by like those modalities, and been able to let the material determine how we move and be an astute listener, so that when the material tells us what it needs to be, we can listen and respond appropriately.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hello. Like at the end of the film, just like by the time we were done watching the film, I was just thinking about how your film is a film that rewards attention to detail, which is part about how the archive is therefore preserved. It's like, but it's happening all live. So if you're always glancing here and there to watch what's happening, and you're taking in more and more, it makes the statement much more clear about how this is a film that needs to be watched over and over again. And I also just think about how there's a small detail about the drum that was being played. The kick drum had a stone's throw record label. And I'm just thinking about, well, what it means in a sense of like the younger generations being the protagonist, even though there's so many more people that make that person. So like, you know, the secondary role of a protagonist when there's so many more people that come before them, and what that means in terms of like how we relate to each other, like on a generational scale. Because there's also the concern about how do we, you know, the perennial question of like, how do we go forward from here, whether in politics, whether in art, whether in just, you know, just being with each other. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, let me see, wrap my hand around that. I'm thinking, can you say the first part? You had like an observation about stone's throw. I want to make sure I get that too.
Yeah, like the kick drum had a Stone's Throw Records sticker on that, you know, and that was a detail about how this is like the film that we're making now. It's like, this is not, you know, the word I was also thinking about is like concurrence. Like everything, it was like the splicing of past footage into present footage is entirely deliberate and seamless. And so it's a matter of saying the past, it's never out there. It's always with us. It's happening around us. That's what informs our practice when we're playing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that comment too. I think in my mind, I'm always thinking about like the things that I consider like great or that have a certain value for me are the things that I can return to, right? So I think it's our own, and in jazz, there's like a value system. And I'm thinking about when the musicians do play, they're never playing the same thing, right? So it's this idea of repetition, and what's the relationship between repetition and Black culture?
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
The motif of the title and like keeping time, that was always there too, in many different kinds of variations, which kind of reminds me, because I've played marching band myself, about how you always go into one section, then another section, but it always has its own reasons for you to come back to it if you want to practice it and play it.
Yeah, dude, this is like we all have to engage with this question, right? Like for me, this has always been like the thing for like black music, right? It's a microcosm. It's a window to like a larger thing that's going on, right? And so in our lives, I feel like we all have to orient ourselves to that or that question of the past, right? Like I'm thinking of tradition. Tradition isn't something that's merely inherited, right? You have to claim that. And some certain traditions die, and that might be difficult, right? And so for me, jazz is, if you read about jazz is this thing that's always been spoken of, that it's dying and or near death, always. From the 60s when it went to, folks left the community and the orchestra, folks call it the sidewalk university, and they came into like the university and ivory towers and stuff like that. And it's like, jazz is dead. Like jazz is always dead or dying, you know what I mean? So it's taking that reality and maybe opening and pointing that back at us, where we do have to, what is our relationship to those who came before us? Like we all have those folks in our lives who, we have to either claim them as ours or make a different move, and so it's me just wanting to highlight that in through the ARC story and Michaela's personal story and the ARC's collective story, because I feel like there's so much sociality that's happening in the band that we could learn from, that we, and I'll speak for myself because that's why I made it, because it's something, that orientation to collective coexistence. I heard like Pharoah Sanders say once, like he wants to be able to live out the principles that he plays about. When I look at them and their history and who they are, I hope and I aspire to be able to, have that same type of dedication and commitment to the people that I'm in collective coexistence with. And I hope to like learn that. Like for me, it's about like, oh shit, there's like a secret. They know a secret. That band, they know a secret. That them coming together, that collectivity, they know a secret. You know what I mean? And I feel like it's mine as well, and I've been kind of distant from that. And so it's like, let's listen closely, and maybe, I could find that same secret and apply it to my life. So, and I feel like we all maybe have that opportunity.
I'll make one last series of points, because I just want to say, like, there's like, when you say jazz is dead, I'm just thinking about like what you just said. I think jazz like always leaves open, like an unenunciated set of open questions. So my open question is, when you say jazz is dead, do we say long live jazz? And the second part is the open question of jazz and its grammar towards, like when we say black radical tradition or radical tradition, how many iterations would we want to spin around? And for us to have that inform us with what we're doing when we're doing it.
Yeah, and it's not me saying that too. You know what I mean? That's like always this like dominant question that exists, is like being placed on the art form. So for me, I defer to like Sonny Rollins. Sonny Rollins will talk about it, where it's like it's something spiritual in the music, so it's never gonna die. Like that's the thing. It's never gonna go anywhere. There's something spiritual there, So, yeah, it's me just being like an astute listener and kind of diagnosing like that history. And in terms of like the iterations, yeah, I go back to.
It's like, what are our roots? Like, they're always changing too. That's the other part.
Well, that's the thing. It doesn't need to be like this singular idea of like roots.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What if we are not rooted? I used to think of this idea of like this singular idea of home. And not having, I don't come from like this one place that I could identify as home. But I've turned that into a strength. That's not, there's something about being us uprooted and dislocated, and they were able to find and make community. Like they're all from all over the place, you know what I mean? And LA's changed so much. It's about the making. I think there's something about the making and the claiming that's going on that they open up, and there's something about the music too that lets you speak into the future. And I'm thinking about Dionne Brown, where she's talking about like this jazz John Coltrane song Venus, where like the task of the artist, and I take this on too, is to kind of speak to the future that we ought to be living in. You know what I mean? So yeah, this question of roots, like yeah, we could claim what that is, but it doesn't have to be a singular notion. But I think the orientation is always to the future we ought to be living in, and I think them gathering is a practice of that and a making too.
Thank you. It's very haptical, that last bit.
Well, I'm reminded of, please come.
Jade.
Bradford Young on this stage 2 years ago was insisting on the other side of that statement is that jazz is the only art form that is always willing to kill itself, right? Which is, of course, it's not his formulation, but like also remembering that part, right? That is equally important.
It makes me think of, because that's the tension. I think I accept that to be truth, though, and I think the musicians do, and that in the music, because every time, like, they're never playing the same thing they're never playing the same thing twice. You know, I take jazz as being a tradition that comes with the death and kind of this articulation of the newness too, right? Because they're never playing the same version of a song. You know, they're always going to birth a new song, a new iteration of it.
Hi. This question is a little like self-indulgent because people seem to be kind of shy tonight. So I'm gonna take us anyway, I have this paper about Insecure that is shelved, and it's really about like the place of LA and the sound of LA. And as two folks who are really familiar with like LA and LA music, I'm curious to hear you describe what is distinct about LA jazz. Like, how does it distinguish itself from other jazzes? And also, like, over time, how does that change? And also, like, I would love a feeling. Yeah. Like, it doesn't, yeah.
Oh, yeah. You came to the right person. The thing I'm thinking about is a few things. Los Angeles is a place that is like always a place of arrival. So it is a place where everyone's always coming from somewhere else on some level. So there's that kind of motion. And then there's also the ocean. And so all of these things create a different feeling because of the landscape, literally. But I always am really trying to impress upon everyone that, especially like the whole West Coast is filled with a whole lot of people making this music, meaning Asian American, indigenous folk, and certainly Mexican American, and all the sounds coming from the borderlands, you know. So all of those things, a figure like Gerald Wilson is making all of those sounds come together all the time. And then a person like Gerald Wilson from that Los Angeles sound leads Billie Holiday's band in the 50s. And so then that sound is actually kind of traveling, and Melba Liston is actually in that band too from Los Angeles. So this thing that we think about LA only like on the coast that doesn't get talked about, and it certainly doesn't get talked about in that series that people know about the music. Anyway, because like almost nothing on the West Coast happens in that series. That it's so full of so many musics. But also, I mean, like that Central Avenue piece of it, the history of Central Avenue had everything to do with, you know, racial covenants and like who could live there and who could play there, and when musicians visited, they could only stay there. And so I always wish, I mean, like there's certain places in history we wish we could go back to, but I want to be there, you know. I want to be at the Dunbar, you know, and hanging out on that street and feeling that. But then we have, luckily, these great musicians, scholars like Horace and Clara Bryant and Melba Liston, who gave us this great archive of stories from Los Angeles. So there's so many ways for us, if we didn't even grow up there, to really to get some feeling of that place. And again, I want to stress that multiracial piece, because I went to the Guelph Jazz Festival, which is in Canada and Ontario, very much like a new music, avant-garde kind of festival. Horace Taft-Scott, all of them will be loved up there. I don't know if they ever got up to that festival. And I remembered feeling a little bit scared to give my paper that was going to deal with the jazz fusion group Hiroshima, because I was like, oh God, that's like so smooth probably to them, and they're going to laugh at me, and I'm not hard and serious to bring up Hiroshima. But the truth is, the Pan-African People's Orchestra and Hiroshima headline gigs in the 70s. I mean, like, that was also Los Angeles jazz, because they were community activists, both groups. And so they were about movement and organizing and being deeply rooted in your history and seeing each other, you know, and encouraging that. And later generations, like there's a Pan-Asian orchestra that is inspired by Horace, you know, so I mean, there's all this beautiful back and forth in the LA jazz scene too. It does still live. There's a whole jazz organization called Jazz is Dead, like a promo, and I almost never want to go to their concerts because I feel upset about that. It's not dead, damn it. But that's me. But I appreciate all this because, you know, the tradition coming from New Orleans is about the dirge and the second line. So it has to be both. I think that whenever we get too caught up on that dirge side, I think we're just, you know, we're not remembering the tradition also has the second line. It also has the joy. It also has the life past the death. So I always think it's both. And then all those New Orleans people went to LA anyway. No. So I don't know. That was my feeling. Okay.
And I'll be super brief. I would only, because that's something I've been thinking about a lot too. I don't think enough attention gets brought to LA as like a space of experimentation and spirituality. You know, you get the idea of like cool jazz and stuff like that, but you don't really hear folks talking. But experimentation was key. The idea of even free jazz, like how did we assign that to New York? But you know, you think about the folks moving through LA, Ornette Coleman and you know, Don Cherry, like moving through LA pre going to New York, right? And then a lot of the folks, you know, kind of were in LA connected to the Arc, over 300 musicians, but folks went to New York. And so that thing that happened and exploded in New York, like it didn't start there. Folks weren't here imitating what was happening over there, you know, and I think that's kind of the thing that I would like to emphasize on the free side of it, but then also on the spiritual side. There's a whole community of mysticism in LA around that time that's connected to like not just musicians, but there was like sites where that was happening, you know what I mean? Bookstores, cultural center, a whole, you know, movement that was going on, that they're connected and in conversation with outside of just musicians, like a whole center of like artist community that they're tapped into.
Yeah, so, yeah, we're at time, so I just want to say thank you once more to Darol and Josslyn for coming and showing the film, and yeah. And of course, thank you to all of you for coming tonight, and I hope you enjoyed the evening. It's been really amazing. Yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.